Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Fractal Diaries podcast. I'm Matt, your host, and this is a place for people who experience non-ordinary states. So that's voices, visions, synchronicities, and other altered experiences. It's a place for them to communicate directly about their experiences and learn from each other. On this podcast, we celebrate people who live great lives with non-ordinary states and provide a non-pathologized perspective so that those with lived experiences can share stories and ideas and learn without stigma. Today, I'll be talking to Josh Roberts. Welcome, Josh. How are you doing?
Thanks, Matt. This is fun, bro. I'm having a blast already.
Nice. Yeah, we've been chatting already. We've got a whole bunch of stuff to talk about. But yeah, welcome to the podcast, Josh. I'll let you introduce yourself and then we'll go from there.
Sweet. Well, I look a little bit like this. From this angle, I look like that. Just an all-round little snapshot is that I was born and raised in Cape Town, South Africa, 38 years ago. And it was through discovering these non-ordinary states of consciousness that brought about a new meaning and purpose and passion in my life. But, birth, if you think about it, is a messy process. It's a scary process. And so my birth into this, I guess, higher dimension was kind of messy. It resulted in a bipolar 1 diagnosis, 6 involuntary psychiatric hospitalizations, 2 arrests. Like I blew $86,000. It's like gave it away to people on the street. And then I got deeply depressed. Couldn't find any light, couldn't find any meaning and purpose. And so I really explored kind of both sides of that dichotomy of just an abundance of energy and meaning and purpose and a complete lack of it. But it was through learning how to process these things and integrate them into my daily reality that, man, I can tell you my world is more colorful and interesting now than it ever was before. So was I glad that I was born? Heck yeah, man. But hey, we didn't have any maps to navigate it. Actually, my South African friends had some maps that were helpful from the South African kind of shamanic spiritual perspective. I found that they were able to kind of guide me through some of these experiences. And so my journey has involved compiling maps. Like I love traveling. I spent a long time in England, man. I lived in England for 5 years, mostly in Cornwall, because it's like the California of England. But I did live in England, Ireland, Scotland, and Wales. Got kicked out of Ireland, but that's okay. So yeah, I traveled a lot. And so I gathered kind of maps of the physical terrain and gathered maps of this metaphysical or this consciousness terrain. And so now my passion is to come together as a community, exactly like you introduced, to bring the different components that we each have, the sum of our lived experience, so that something larger than the sum of our parts can emerge. So I'll finish up by saying that that's what I'm trying to do with a program called Neurodiversity Gifts, where we map out these different states of consciousness, exploring multimodal ways of understanding them, from depth psychology to philosophy, spirituality, science, and postmodern insights. It's so much fun, man. And I meet people like you, like some of the most interesting minds out there. So every day is a waking lucid dream, I tell you.
Fantastic. I love that. I think you have such a rich tapestry that's led to where you are today, and that's created the person you are, and it really shines through in everything about you. I feel your story as well. I think a lot of us who experience non-ordinary states, I think, you're right to kind of mention that the birthing of that experience is similar to a birth process. It's incredibly messy, and except the difference being we don't have, doctors or midwives who are experienced in what specifically is going on. Maybe some would argue we do, but hearing those different perspectives about what all of that means, I think is so helpful. So I'm really interested to talk more about, you said you have kind of family and communities that helped you see these non-ordinary states from a different lens. Was that quite early on in your childhood, in your life, or was it as it started to happen?
So I was raised in a spiritual environment. So like the belief in the unseen realm was there from the beginning, but for me, it wasn't really real. I guess, I was also raised with Western education. So basically it was taught that we're just random atoms bumping up against each other. There's no meaning or purpose besides maybe squashing the atom next to you. So all of that was a little bit abstract. I mean, if I spoke about those kinds of experiences, my family and that environment would get it. But for me, it wasn't very real. My first so-called psychotic episode was actually triggered by weed. by marijuana. So
Mhm.
psychedelics, I believe, put us in touch with this other dimension, which I believe is as real, maybe even more real than this dimension. And weed is a mild psychedelic. For most people, I guess it just makes them hungry and they just eat pizza and get the giggles. But for me, it sent me down Alice's rabbit hole. And the first time that happened was in San Francisco, in California, when I was 22. And it was just me and my brother there and this dog. Like, I believed I was telepathically communicating with this dog and was downloading these epiphanies about the nature of reality, like the nature of myself. And because my brother was chill and he knew me, like he really had my best interests in mind, he just supported me as I went through it. It lasted about maybe an hour, and then it just kind of wore off. Oof, and I came back to mutual consensus reality. So I was able to have that experience and come back. And then for the next year or so, I just processed that, like, what on earth was that? Then I had another one of those in Cape Town in South Africa about a year later. And this time I was with my friends who descend from the Bushmen, the San Bushmen, which is a race of people who see the interconnection in everything. They see us as part of an ecosystem, like the Lion King, the circle of life. Yeah. Everything works together. Everything has its reason. Everything has its place. And so when I went through another one of these experiences in a nightclub, this whole group of my friends just gathered around me and completely supported me, dude, like through some really random stuff. They were just completely unconditionally accepting and nurturing, kept me safe, and then drove me home. So that one lasted about 4 hours. But this time, like I recognized that there was a darker side to this higher dimension too. It's probably a territory, man. It's like discovering the new world.
Elephant's Graveyard.
What's that?
The Elephant's Graveyard in Lion King.
Oh, interesting. The places not to go. I like that. See, the Lion King, dude, everything's a metaphor, like especially the Disney movies. All of those, I think, are deep allegories that if we explore anything deep enough, we tap into these transcendent truths. So I discovered the Elephant's Graveyard and heard the cackle of the hyenas and scars roar around the corner. I was like, dude, what on earth? This is some pretty scary stuff. So I cut out weed for 8 years after that experience. So again, they guided me. And after about 4 hours, I came back to mutual consensus reality. But then 8 years later, after studying psychology, I got my bachelor's in psychology from the University of South Africa. I came over to America and was doing my master's in theology at Fuller Theological Seminary, trying to fuse the worlds of psyche and spirits. And I discovered like the infinite potential of the mind and the spirit. And I felt like I was being led by God to smoke again, to try it now that I was so well informed. It turns out that there's all these different kind of communications. We've got to learn to discern the voice of God from the voices that pretend to be God. And so I did. I smoked again, but this time I was alone. And I was up in this beautiful mountain setting. And I just fell into a different dimension, kind of like Alice falling down the rabbit hole or something. And all these archetypes, all these patterns that I'd known my whole life through Disney movies, through the books I was reading, through like everything came alive and was completely relevant to me in that moment. Because I started acting out what I basically believed was a lucid dream, society didn't like that. And so since I didn't have anyone there to kind of walk alongside me like I had in the past, I got arrested. They thought that I was on LSD. They thought I was tripping, but I was just having a so-called manic experience. So without that kind of mediator between the unseen world and our world, I was shoved into a jail cell, given a criminal record, and it launched this whole kind of series of events that created a downward spiral. So I think that there's ways to navigate the birthing process, but if we don't have the midwives or even just someone there to, have towels and water or something like that, then it can get pretty dangerous.
Yeah. Well, thanks for sharing. I think it's really interesting to think about it as, I guess the difference between these states and then the birthing process is not just a one and done. Different events can trigger changes in people's consciousness in different times, at different stages in their life, and the effect of like who you're around and their perception of it and how much space they can hold for a non-ordinary state is huge, I think, in terms of the impact of then how you are going to process that and how long it'll take you to potentially talk about that again, or learn from it. And I think it's really nice in your story to hear, twice that you had communities there who were able to really hold space for what was happening. But then also you've experienced the other side of what can happen when that's not the case, and where that can lead as well. So I think that's probably the reason that you have an appreciation for these states, whilst also understanding the difficulties and the terrain of the elephant's graveyard, as it were.
Yeah, I thought that was such a good way that you put it. And I think it's so cool what you're doing here, because you're bringing together communities of people who can support each other in ways that kind of speak the conceptual language of the person going through it. So I think that as we discuss these things and as we put language and kind of conceptual maps to it, we'll discover there's actually a real territory here. And within new territories, there's opportunities for treasure, there's opportunities for adventure. And so, yeah, what you're doing is transcending the globe with the internet and bringing together these like and diverse minds to create something that's larger than the sum of its parts.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate that. I'm curious how non-ordinary states now manifest for you. So you talked about specific, would you call any of those like an emergence or an emergency, or are you kind of just neutral in the language for it? Because I guess in my own experience, I often see it as like, pre anything happening, and then full-blown emergence, and then from then on kind of I could retreat out of them and back in, but the non-ordinary states would always be present as like an extra dimension to my life. Is just to what extent would I acknowledge that, and how would I respond to it as well? I think we're two kind of things that would vary depending on my perspective. How do you find that non-ordinary states are now manifesting?
Yeah, I like the word emergence, because that's kind of like a birthing, right? It's like you're emerging into something else. I also like the word metamorphosis, that this caterpillar dissolves its molecular structure and then reemerges as a butterfly, which originally starts on the same kind of territory. You're still on the ground. And then you can also soar. You can also go higher and see the same terrain that you crawled on as a caterpillar, but from a different perspective.
Right,
and so, like in the myth of Icarus, I flew too high in the beginning. Like, what? I got wings, bro. Watch this. And I went too high and then came crashing down. So I'm able to now access these states of consciousness, which I basically live in the state all the time. But I tend to try to keep my little butterfly feelers on the ground, and I'll flap every now and again. But I think that our role is not to just experience the thrill of flight, or even to have these kind of enlightening experiences. I think the role that the other people served in my life is to be the mediators between this dimension and that other dimension. And without having our feet on the ground here and developing the conceptual maps and the language and the relationships to be able to walk alongside people as they also go through their metamorphosis, I think that misses the whole point of the hero's journey, of returning back to the world that we left and bringing our treasures there. And man, it's exactly like you say, it's not a one and done thing. Metamorphosis happens time and time again. Like, I actually kind of think that birth happens time and time again. I think this might all be womb 2.0. Like, this whole universe is like, think about when we were in the womb, we thought that was the world. And we could hear these kind of sounds from outside the womb, like the voice of our mother or the voice of our father, but we couldn't see them. I think all of this could be the same kind of way. There's a dimension that's then we can kind of hear the reverberations. We're going to be birthed into that world that's even more real than this soon. It's just a continual, maybe then it happens again, bro. Maybe it's just like an eternal cycle of birth upon birth upon birth. But yeah, I think it's really important what you say. It's not just a one and done deal.
It's fantastic. I love that analogy of the womb. In my own, non-ordinary experiences, when I've had voices that have described, I mean, often mine go into a lot of detail, they'll map things out. That's exactly what they were drawing, but I've never considered it that. So that they kind of called it like a fractal of lives. I've never considered the womb as part of that. That's a brilliant addition. I guess, and I know that like you could consider life stages maybe as similar, but that kind of message of like of you being inside a different world within your own world, like that is something we have all experienced, and it's something, yeah, we never consider because it was a kind of, we don't consider it ourselves, right? Um, so that's, yeah, that's really fascinating. I love that. I love that take on it. But yeah, absolutely. And I guess so. Another area that we like to talk about on the podcast is kind of the experience of synchronicity and day to day, sort of meaningful messages or you know, magical non-ordinary experiences that people have. Um, Often for me, I don't know if you have the same, but like it, when you spoke about kind of the voice of the mother and father outside of the womb, maybe something you could hear and maybe react to. Often I see our day-to-day synchronicities that we live through as quite similar to that. Like it's like a message from another world that's just kind of pointing you in a different way, or maybe saying, oh, maybe this path be a bit better. Um, but it's not quite in this world. It's like from some other place. I don't know if that's like how you see your own synchronicities.
I like that. I hadn't thought about it like that. And I'd love to hear your experiences of how those kind of communications come about. But I think you're right in that synchronicities are a communication from a deeper or higher level of reality. What I think it is, and by the way, my whole so-called manic and psychotic experience is one big synchronicity. And when I say that I live in this state of consciousness now, it's basically following synchronicities. I don't just randomly chase them, otherwise you find yourself chasing the wind, but I'm just
Yeah.
aware that the outer world and the inner world aren't as separate as we sometimes think, and
Mhm.
that this line of who I am can be permeable, and that the outer world can reach me in tangible ways. So I think it's that kind of having a key or map that you lay on external reality, and poof, when it aligns, that's like a little spot that gains your attention, and then you follow the next thing, and if that continues to lead you down a certain path, man, at the end of that path, I found a whole kind of thing that was prepared for me that I didn't have to do anything for. Like I was kind of raised thinking that I had to make everything happen, pull yourself up by your own bootstraps. And so that's a lot of pressure and it's also exhausting. And I just know that I don't have the skill set to be able to pull that off.
Mhm.
But through discovering synchronicities through my mental health experiences and through these non-ordinary states of consciousness, I discovered a guiding power, a compass that aligns my internal and external realities in ways that I couldn't come up with myself. And there's a peace in it because I can just relax, knowing that there's this larger world out there that actually has a plan for me and it's benevolent. It's like got my best interests at heart. So it's really allowed a new freedom and a new authenticity. So I think, yeah, the synchronicity we've spoken about the role of synchronicities in life, the importance, the ability to maybe even map these out on a global scale wouldn't be that
Mhm.
hard to do with an app or something like that. But I'd love to hear some of yours, or what are your synchronicities like?
Yeah, I liked your analogy. I guess I can see it like a flowing river, and sometimes in life, like we're taught that we need to walk the river, I guess. Like so that would be kind of pulling yourself up by your bootstraps. Like you have to walk it. Whereas in reality, like if you're doing what's meant for you in life, it should actually be the easiest thing that you can do. So what's meant for you should be really easy, and you can actually, if you just stop trying to like force it and let like life happen to you, um, then I agree. Like you flow faster and you get to where you want to go in a much easier way, and it feels better. Um, but I think it's so. I mean, we're all. I struggle with it. We're all kind of don't do that at times, and we'll work on. We'll aim for things like thinking that we need to push in a certain area and following the flow. It's something that I think can come and go, and often. I know with bipolar experiences, psychiatrists kind of view the graph of bipolar as being like this, and that's how it was described to me. You'll kind of you've got this lifelong thing. You'll be like up, and then you'll be down. You'll be up and down. So you have to take these so that that's less. But I think that what that's missing out on is the fact that what's being charted there is more how in the flow are you, and over time that you can be climbing and progressing and learning, and then we have that kind of that dip, but when you climb back up, you gain the knowledge and the insights from the previous climb. It's not just like a kind of oh, now you're down here again, now you're up here. So in my experience, like every time that I have had those falls or those dips, um, there's been kind of learnings from it, and it's really correlated with like how far away, or sometimes like you say too close to the flow were you, and finding that balance between the different worlds. So yeah, I think I remember comparing it to like say Bitcoin, for example. People talk about Bitcoin as like very volatile and it's always crashing, but like if you follow that narrative, it's very reductive. You miss the fact that if you were to zoom out, actually it's gaining value
Mm,
over time. And I think it's the same with experiencing non-ordinary states. Yes, it's difficult, and often, you can have experiences that can kind of distance you from everything that you value, and it can kind of be very destructive. But sometimes, when you come back out of that, it's a bit like the dead leaves have been burnt away, and like a new forest is growing. So, and in my experiences, like as the more and more that happens, that counterintuitive, the less crashing happens, and the more stability you find, which is also true of, for example, an asset that's finding its value like Bitcoin. It would, sorry, it's a weird example, weird analogy, but
no,
over
it's
time it would
perfect.
actually become more like the gold. It finds its value, it's stable, it balances out. Um, so yeah, I think for me, like synchronicities can often be an indicator that you're really in that flow and you're on that right track. But also, like the absence of synchronicity um, can be just as useful. Like it can make you think, well, um, what is it about this experience? Like, what am I learning from this? Is like, I think the down and the shadow work, it's all just as important as well. Like it's still showing you something about yourself or something that you need to address. Um, like how can I get back onto my path or my flow? Um, but not but knowing that sometimes like deviations from the path are actually where you find treasure, where you find learnings, where you grow in other ways too. So yeah, I think it's a really interesting topic, and yeah, it's certainly something I nerd out about a lot, as you know.
That was, man, your metaphors are so impressive. Like I could talk about those two metaphors of the river and Bitcoin for hours. I think metaphors, because what else can we do except use the concepts that are available to us as metaphors? I mean, that's how the spiritual masters taught. When we're describing a high dimensional reality that we don't have constructs for, we're just a bunch of fingers pointing at the moon going, oh, oh, moon, moon. We're gesturing towards something. And both of those metaphors, I think, gesture towards it beautifully. So the flow, that's like the getting into the flow state, being able to ride that river, that's the Wu Wei, or in Taoism, like the path of ease, and just letting it take you. And then
Mm.
with Bitcoin, that's absolutely right, because when stocks shoot up or when crypto shoots up, it'll consolidate for a little while, and it'll build. What it's doing is kind of saying, can I keep this height? Do I have support levels that will allow me to keep this height?
Mm-hmm.
And if it falls back on its support and the support holds, oof, then it'll go to new heights. Then it's healthy for it to consolidate a little bit. Can you keep this support? Maybe this time not. You come back down, bounce off the previous support. Boom, boom, boom. All right, cool. I'm not where I was, but I'm also not where I want to be. But this is a healthy kind of retesting of the support. And so I think the more we build these levels of support and these structures within our life that we can fall back on and trust, well, we can really go to a new decentralized height. So I think both of those metaphors were epic, dude.
Absolutely, um, and I think it's also um, interestingly, like the comparison's similar because if you're talking about cryptocurrencies, they're a new asset class, and that's the reason that you see all of this volatility, because the terrain has not yet been mapped. So like it's you can't expect um, the people who were walking beside the river to have the same types of maps as the people whose natural state has been to fall into the river. Um, but there are certain people who understand that and like kind of give that market more patience and understand like just because it's in this state now doesn't mean that that's how it will forever be, doesn't mean that that's how that's going to map out. And there's people who are going and actively learning about that terrain because they understand that it's a new territory, and there's value there. And I think the same is true in these higher dimensional experiences and these non-ordinary states. One approach could be to treat them with fear and to say, oh my god, like I had these experiences happen to me. They left me feeling really low or scared or overwhelmed, which is completely natural. you've entered into essentially a new world. Maybe maybe only you could see it, but for you, that's what was happening. And that's one approach, and potentially that's good in the short term. But I think once you've opened your eyes to these terrains and these experiences, the solution can't be to run away from it. The solution has to be to learn, to understand it, and to do that. It's where, like you say, about mapping out the terrain, having conversations, all this stuff. That's the best way to approach unfamiliar territory. And there'll be the elephants graveyards, there'll be Pride Rock. Sometimes you might realize you're on the edge of Pride Rock, and you need to kind of do some grounding. But yeah, it's not a reason to kind of completely abandon it, which I think potentially previously, like some of the ways that we've looked at these states as disorders or as illnesses has led to that kind of conclusion, right? Like, this is something to be stigmatized, ignored, shunned. And yeah, I definitely think that we shouldn't do that.
I think that's so cool, man. Like, there's so many layers of this metaphor that we can explore. And so, like, you don't want to push people who are walking along the edge of the bank into the river. It's like you said, you want to be able to straddle both worlds, because if you're pushed into the river and you don't know how to swim, then you're in Joseph Campbell's The Person in Psychosis drowns in the same water in which the mystic swims with the light, and water can be dangerous and you can drown in that water. So we can slowly construct a boat that can allow people to transition from the land into the water. But what I think people on the edge of the riverbank are going to discover is that they were actually standing on the water the whole time, that it's a perennial river that runs underground too. And that the land that they're standing on, if you dig into that, you'll find that the water's there too. And if we now tie that into the cryptocurrency metaphor, we think that kind of conventional currency, fiat currency, is solid land, but it's not backed by anything either. Yeah. It's not even tied to the gold standard. So fiat currency is also an illusion. The materialism worldview, the land that people think is so solid, dig deeper into that and you'll find that it's actually not. It's ephemeral as well. And so what's really nourishing all of this is this underground perennial river. And so once we discover that this is an actual natural state of being, and that science, good science, is always evolving its understanding. That's how it grows. It maintains this humility to say, we might have had it completely backwards, just like we had the world backwards until Galileo came and showed us, no, it's not the sun revolving around us, it's vice versa. There's this element of paradox, this beautiful, ironic, and kind of hilarious element of paradox in life, that what's first will be last, and what's last will be first, and that the land is maybe like the least stable place to stand. So yeah, I think it's really cool.
Absolutely. I think often when you experience like a paradigm shift, it's the fear isn't of the new paradigm. The fear is of the fact that your paradigm changed. And I think like that's an interesting nuance that we don't acknowledge. So people will go back to the old paradigm, or shut out the new paradigm. But as you said, the people walking on the land, that paradigm is also shifting. The water might be rising. That just because it was concrete in your mind before doesn't mean that that's how it will remain. So I think that's a brilliant analogy about the boat, or maybe give people some scuba gear. It's just ways that you can explore this in safe ways that are encourage understanding and keep you grounded and are manageable, so that you can evolve and adapt rather than trying to cling to a paradigm that may no longer be true.
100%. What are some of those ways that you found that help you to kind of embrace this new paradigm in safe ways?
I find for me, I generally say, like, what you focus on expands. So
yes,
when I after like one of my really deep, I call this world that we're describing the fractal, because that was when I was really deep into it. I was kind of suspended in space. I was talking to like a creator archetype who was showing me all of my lives, and it was like this mad experience, fantastic experience. but he kind of describes that I am an archetype. I'm a soul that kind of exists across a lot of different dimensions.
Hmm.
In the same way that the problems that I'm facing are also things that exist and reoccur. Um, and we compared it to a fractal in the conversation. That almost like I myself am like a fractal, and that I'll every time the universe kind of maybe makes a new version, there might be something similar to me, like an archetype that's like me might show up. Um, and we were saying that there's certain problems that you have to face in life to evolve and grow, and like those problems will be the same. And if you don't face them, then you'll experience the same ones over and over again. And I think fractal is a great word because it shows that that happens, well, it sounds like that happens at this universal scale, like you say, well, being birthed into new lives. If you haven't worked out your issues, you're going to just see the same stuff over and over again. I think it can also just happen within our own lives. Like we can, I heard someone compare making the same mistakes to like standing on the rake. Like stand on a rake, hits you in the face. You move away, stand on another rake, hits you in the face. Like if you're in that mode, you're just standing on the same rakes over and over again. Um, so I think that's kind of archetypal to the idea of using these states to see where the guidance is taking you, because that's probably where you need to go, because that's where you need to grow. And for me, in terms of how I make sure that I'm not like kind of going too far into it, I think a lot of it is just how you react to what's happening. So in my early experiences, it was really overwhelming, as it is for everyone who goes through these kinds of states. But I was having visionary experiences. I was like at night sometimes it would be like voices would start talking, and that can be like obviously really overwhelming. My dreams would be like more real than my own waking life.
Hmm.
And I think as I kind of understood that there was much more to this, I just treated it with more curiosity. I remember like the early symptoms that I would have been like, oh, this is psychosis. Like I remember like I'd wake up and like there was like a clown in my bed just like sat in front of me. I remember just being like, okay, there's a clown here. Hello. And then it just kind of laughed and faded away. And then after that you then get the really interesting stuff come through. So like sometimes I've noticed that like um some of these archetypes are kind of almost like gatekeepers. Like they'll just like send something
Mm.
spooky out, see how you react. And if
Mm.
you kind of run away, you're not really ready to hear what the message was there trying to say. And I've had that happen a lot of
Wow.
times. Um, Sometimes like if I have a dream that's really big and it's helping me process something maybe difficult in my life, those gatekeepers will be around that dream. I remember one recently where um, there was like a witch woman in the dream, and I kind of when I was able to be like, okay, just treat the witch with love and just see it as part
Mm.
of the universal experience. Then it faded away, and then the dream was actually about something that happened in school that I hadn't processed, and it was like it showed me that experience again, and I was able to look at that experience from a much more nuanced perspective. And I woke up and I was in floods of tears, and it was the state I needed to be in to be able to have that memory and process it. So I think a lot of times, like these things can be like if it's too much, it's because it's a reflection of where you're at. It's like, are you ready to hear kind of what the universe is telling you here? If you're overwhelmed, it's completely fine. It just means that right now, you've got a certain capacity. You can carry a certain amount of weight on your back, and maybe like if you were to go further, it would be too much weight, and maybe that means it's the time to stop. So I think it's as much about seeing where you're at as anything else. Like if you're allowing your kind of fractal experiences, or if you're kind of having a little dip in the fractal sea, um, and then something is too much for you, like that's absolutely fine to kind of move on from that at that time, I think.
Brilliantly put. Yeah, absolutely fascinating. This concept of gatekeepers who are there to protect treasure. If we think about the medieval archetype about the girl and the treasure is being protected by a dragon, you got to slay the dragon to get the riches. And my favorite archetype for understanding these states of consciousness is the Christian narrative, the Jesus power. It was originally called the way. And so when Jesus first came up with his baptism and he was filled with this high dimensional perspective, he was led by the Spirit of God to be tested in the desert. And that's exactly how it comes. And the same thing happened with Buddha. Before he became the awakened one, the Buddha, he had this test by Mara, where his kind of integrity was tested, his lust was tested, his thirst for power was tested. I do think that as we awaken to this new level of consciousness, we got to be able to handle the things that come our way. And so these gatekeepers, maybe they're even trying to protect us from being destroyed, because like a tree needs to be solidly rooted to be able to carry the powerful weight of the fruit. If we're talking about very real kind of supernatural, in a way, supernatural abilities, like the Big Five, parapsychological phenomena, these kinds of things, if we're not grounded, then the weight of the fruit can topple the tree and destroy the tree. So, I mean, maybe the whole thing has been designed so that we can rise to the level that we can handle and no further. Or maybe some people do rise further than they can handle, and then it does destroy them. So yeah, I think that's really interesting about how that concept works within your dreams, that it actually had a treasure that allowed you to process it. If you just kind of chilled and weren't fazed by the witch and, hey, what's up, witch? Hey, what's up, clown? It's our fear that shuts things down. And that activates the amygdala, that fight or flight freeze response. If we can just know that there's a benevolence to the design of things, we can kind of trust the process. And then the things that are chasing us in our dreams, these big shadow creatures, if we say, all right, what's up? Can I help you? Cup of tea? Yeah. Or whatever, then it can dissolve into what's actually hiding beneath it. It's kind of like the Wizard of Oz. No, that's a really interesting framework.
The greater our ability to see everything as interconnected one and therefore like useful or helpful, the better. And I know that's hard because we've all had experiences where it's really difficult to work out why it's useful and why it's helpful. The more that you can understand the intentions and see the big picture, the more you can get back into that flow.
Absolutely. So yeah, if we can understand these things better, then it makes the process wise and interconnected and scary. Everything's got its useful part. Just like the intelligence that created the world made us all different for a reason. It made all the different archetypes different for a reason. And so that's neurodiversity, that diversity of experience, that diversity of duality, even the light and the dark, all of it has its place within this larger zoomed out mosaic. Like you say, when you zoom out, you see the bigger picture.
When in doubt, zoom out.
When in doubt, zoom out. What?
So yeah, I thought it'd be great to also just touch on the work that you've been doing, and your new course that's coming out, and everything you're doing at NAMI. I think I love the interdisciplinary approach to it, and I think it speaks volumes to what we've been talking about. So yeah, it'd be great to hear more about it, and obviously talk to people about where you can be contacted and if people want to learn more.
Thanks, man. That's really cool, man. Yeah, I think it's absolutely riveting. I think there's a big paradigm shift happening within the globe in general. And I actually feel like the mental health field can be the epicenter of this shift in understanding consciousness. When I was in seminary, the dean of the whole school, who's a really well-respected academic, he says he thinks that we're going to see a paradigm shift in our lifetime that's the same scale as Galileo's. Woof, wait, what? It's the other way around. And he thinks it's going to happen in the domain of consciousness. And so what field specializes in consciousness? Mental health is one of those fields. And so it's a real honor to work in the field, man, to be able to bear my true colors and drop that mask that of persona, the personality, and be able to be myself in the field. So yeah, it's a privilege that I get to work with NAMI, the National Alliance on Mental Illness, which is America's largest grassroots mental health organization. I started off with them as a peer support specialist, someone who has these maps of lived experience and can walk alongside others as they go through their metamorphosis, connecting them to their own goals. And then I've transitioned with NAMI. I'm still very much involved in the peer movement, which is burgeoning here in California. But with NAMI now, I'm a presenter, and I get to present at conferences and in universities, churches, businesses, all these kinds of things. And so I was presenting at a Mental Health America conference a while ago, and they're like, well, present on whatever it is that you want to present on. And I presented on exactly these different maps of meaning. And so I called it Neurodiversity Gifts. And so I'm really privileged that NAMI San Diego is backing that map of lived experience. And then it's a huge blessing that the National Empowerment Center flew out from Massachusetts. And just yesterday, we got wrapped up filming a 7-part training series on neurodiversity gifts, which mirrors the hero's journey, where like you start in the world that you know, you go through these tests and these challenges and temptations, you end up in an abyss in almost every case, that cocoon of metamorphosis where the old dissolves, which can be really kind of disconcerting. But then you come out a more vibrant creature and you come back to the world that you left with fresh perspective, with butterflies, a viewpoint. And so neurodiversity gifts does that. It starts in the West, and we look at the Western models of neurodiversity. We then explore science and frequencies and the science of mind, delving into the quantum, exploring David Bohm's theory and what quantum physics is telling us about the nature of reality, but also spectrums and frequencies, because we only see a tiny sliver of visible light in the much broader electromagnetic spectrum. Understanding more of that spectrum gives you practical utility. Infrared, you can change slides, ultraviolet, X-ray, you can look within yourself and heal yourself. So we explore science. Then we move on to depth psychology and Carl Jung's neurodiversity and how he changed the field of psychology, which means the study of the soul, through his own experiences of psychosis, through his own lived experience. Then from there, we move into beyond culturocentrism, learning wisdom from other cultures, because sometimes we can think that we're the pinnacle of having it figured out. But we explore some of the wisdom from other cultures, like the South African Sangomas, their shamanic perspective. We delve into the territory of the overlap of psychedelics or entheogens and these states of madness, and the implications of this higher dimension. Where are the elephant graveyards? Where are the Pride Rocks? We look at the Filipino Babaylands and wisdom from the Japanese. Then in the next module, we move beyond chronocentrism, thinking that our time is the pinnacle of existence and that the ancients were primitive. Not the case. There's wisdom from the ancients, and we turn to Greek philosophy, checking out Plato's cave allegory, the Icarus myth, and Chiron. And we look to the spiritual models, higher dimensional Christianity and higher dimensional Hinduism. Then we start to transition back to the familiar world, and yet it's still mysterious, looking at dreams and your compass of metaphor, kind of like the things we're talking about, how the dream terrain and so-called psychosis share a lot of common overlap, and the power to navigate that is through metaphor and allegory and how to kind of tread that path. And then finally, we end up back in the modern world that we left, but this time with a colorful perspective, looking at postmodern insights and doing an ukutwasa graduation. And so in the postmodern world, it's like you're saying, there's some models that can help us understand this, because we can straddle those two worlds, or maybe like jump back to the old world because it felt more safe. Well, Dr. Suzanne Brown has a model that helps us to know that that's just a natural stage. There's 5 stages in going through this, and that we can come to the final 5th stage, which is a new way of being in the world. And that's a stage that I think is going to dawn on humanity in general. And it's like a tree. Some buds will start to open before other buds. But I think the buds that are starting to open now are able to connect like they never have before. And so we're also having this online platform of connection. And I'd love to explore more with you about how we could do something like that together. But at the moment, it's at neurodiversitygifts.community, because I feel like something new is burgeoning. And just some of the paradigms you've shared today, I think, are very valuable, man. If I had known this when I was in the psychiatric hospital, stuck there being told that your brain is malfunctioning and sorry, there's no meaning and purpose, you could have transformed my whole journey. You could have saved me a lot of heartache. So if we could bring this to the people who are in the cave of abyss, and the people who are Icarus and going too far towards the sun, and if we can ground everyone in this larger picture, if when in doubt we can zoom out, well, I think we can actually get a bigger picture of who we are. And when we understand who we are, our whole world shifts, because we're actually higher dimensional beings having a shared experience. And it's a beautiful, beautiful journey, my man.
Oh, love it. Yes. Oh, all of that. Fantastic. And I think a testament to the guys you're working with at NAMI and just the institution for giving you this platform and allowing you to share these perspectives. And I'm sure like many of us have had limiting experiences or restricting experiences in mental health systems, but like when I hear you talk and when I hear about the work that you're doing, it really gives me hope for the future. And I think your idea about it being the pinnacle of consciousness research and understanding, that's how it should be. That's where where mental health should go, and everything that you do, all of the research you've done, and the way that you can communicate that and transcribe that, I think is so helpful and is really going to push that boat forward. So just well done for everything you're doing, and exactly the same to you. If I could have seen any of your videos when I was, when I was in wards, thinking that my brain had been microwaved, as I was told, then I would have been on a very different path very earlier in my life. But as we say, everything has its place, everything has its reason, and sometimes being in that cave, it's just as valuable as being outside of it as well. So, yeah, I think I'm really excited for where these communities can go. I think there's real value there, and I can't wait to see what the journey unfolds and where we can go.
Let's go. The journey of 1,000 miles starts with a single step. And we've even taken that step today, man. Let's let the path unravel before us, and we just float down it.
Yes. Yeah. Thank you so much, Josh. It's been an absolute pleasure to talk to you today. Hopefully we can get you back on the podcast again soon. And yeah, for anyone who's interested in Josh's work, Neurodiversity Gifts, I'll link it in the description. And yeah, look forward to chatting again soon.
Thanks, my man. I think this platform that you have is great. The Neurodiversity Gift 7-part training will probably be coming out in May for Mental Health Awareness Month, and people can pick that up at www.powertou.org. And I think that this is the start of something fresh, this dawning of a new day, a new understanding of what we are. So it's cool that we're transcending the globe right now, man. We're bookending the day, because my day is starting in California and your day is ending in England. Transcending the hemispheres, we're transcending the planet. And so, hey, listeners, thanks for being here as well. Thanks for lending your minds and your hearts to this conversation. And we'd love to hear from you. Like, what are your perspectives on all of this? What resonated? What do you think could be tweaked? Because we are constructing something that's larger than the sum of our parts. And so it's a beautiful, expanding, and maybe eternal adventure. And it involves partying on this boat as it drifts down the river. So you're all cordially invited to the party. Cool. Thanks, Matt. Appreciate you, dude. Bam.
Thank you, Josh.